Tonight, respect for marriage.
It will make our country a better, fairer place to live.
The debate over a bill that critics say infringes on religious freedom.
This would essentially give a green light to those who want to persecute people of faith.
And rail strike looming.
I really believe that they're going to have a strike.
Fueling fears over a supply chain snarl heading into the holidays. Plus, zero COVID.
Zero COVID policy has been a disaster, both economically and politically inside China.
Protests in China heat up. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The fight for marriage equality and the future of religious freedom in America. Good evening in Washington, D.C. I'm Jenna Browder. The Senate is moving quickly to pass a bill meant to protect same-sex and interracial marriage. Supporters say it's about protecting marriage equality. Opponents, though, say it would sharply curtail religious freedom. Caitlin Burke has tonight's top story. Caitlin, what's the Senate timeline here?
Jenna, Senate Democrats want to advance the Respect for Marriage Act while their party still controls the House. Religious freedom advocates, however, say it would encourage lawsuits and spell disaster for churches and faith-based organizations.
This would essentially give a green light to those who want to persecute people of faith.
The bill's champions, like Senate Leader Chuck Schumer, say it would protect marriage equality for all Americans, regardless of any future state law or Supreme Court decision.
It will make our country a better, fairer place to live.
The legislation would ensure that if your marriage was legal in the state where you were married, then government officials from other states and localities can't refuse to recognize its validity on the basis of sex, race, ethnicity, or national origin. While the 12 Senate Republicans supporting the bill maintain it provides religious liberty protections, other GOP members believe there are loopholes that don't provide adequate equal treatment.
I believe the rights of every individual should be honored. But this is not choosing to be able to protect the rights of every individual. This is saying some people are more equal than others. That's a problem.
As Washington lawmakers grapple over the legislation, the faith community nationwide is also at odds over the bill.
Unless you comply with this, you can face lawsuits, you can face federal government action, you could even potentially lose your tax-exempt status.
Other prominent Christian voices like David French, senior editor of The Dispatch, support the move, although he has publicly commented in the past of his moral opposition to same-sex marriage. French says the bill contains crucial provisions for people of faith and preserves the legal status quo, something echoed by Republican supporter of the bill, Senator Tom Tillis.
The bill also makes clear that no religious organization will be required to provide any services for the celebration of same-sex marriage. That means that no church or religious organization will be required to perform, recognize, or celebrate same-sex marriages. We also took steps to protect the tax-exempt status of religious nonprofit organizations.
In an op-ed for The Atlantic, French wrote, quote, "The magic of the American Republic is that it can create space for people who possess deeply different worldviews to live together, work together, and thrive together, even as they stay true to their different religious faiths and moral convictions."
Republican Senator Mike Lee has proposed an amendment making clear the proposed legislation does not constitute a national policy endorsing a particular view of marriage. He maintains that would better protect faith-based individuals, nonprofits, and organizations. Lee is urging the 12 current Republican supporters of the Respect for Marriage Act to withhold support unless his amendment is added. Jenna?
All right, Caitlin Burke, thank you very much. And here with us now, Greg Baylor, Senior Counsel with the Alliance Defending Freedom. Greg, welcome. So 12 Republicans support this bill. For those who don't, though, what is at the crux of the controversy?
Well, this deceptively named bill actually disrespects the American people and threatens our fundamental freedoms. Those who support the bill claim it merely codifies the Supreme Court's erroneous, mistaken 2015 decision in Obergefell, in which they invented a right to same-sex marriage. But the fact of the matter is that this bill does much more. Its sweeping language and its new enforcement mechanism threatens countless Americans and increases the likelihood of litigation. Those who disagree with the new orthodoxy on same-sex marriage face not only litigation for their disagreement, but the potential loss of their tax-exempt status.
Yeah. So what about the provisions in the bill, though, that are meant to, to close those possible loopholes? Would those not protect churches and other institutions?
No, they would not. They would certainly not protect them from the problems that this bill really creates. The language about tax-exempt status in the bill does not prevent the IRS from stripping a nonprofit of its charitable and thus tax-exempt status because of its views and practices regarding marriage. This bill does not stop litigation against nonprofit organizations like faith-based adoption and foster placement agencies who simultaneously work closely with the government and follow their beliefs about marriage. The whole piece about preventing churches from being forced to solemnize, that's not what people are asking for. That's not where the pressure is on religious liberty in the United States. And the fact of the matter is, if a church is ever going to win a case under the First Amendment, it's that one. So these alleged protections are really much less than they appear to be.
Yeah, this is really a flashpoint in our culture. People have very strong opinions on both sides. What do you say to the people on the other side who do believe that there is a need to codify same-sex and interracial marriage?
Well, it really is unnecessary. The Supreme Court, this all started with the Supreme Court's decision in the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe versus Wade. And the Supreme Court made it very clear in their decision that that decision does not affect rights under cases like Obergefell. And I think that this was, there was a lot of unnecessary fear that was generated. I think that this was originally a political stunt designed to make Republicans take an uncomfortable vote. But I would tell them, look at the situation. Is it anything like what we saw in the wake of Roe versus Wade, where states were constantly trying to adopt new legislation that would pass constitutional muster? No state in the United States is trying to challenge Obergefell. And again, the Supreme Court itself has said it's not going to use the Dobbs decision to undermine Obergefell.
I'd like to get your thoughts on Senator Lee's amendment. Do you think that that's a good fix, and would it amend the situation, the bill?
Yeah, it would certainly be a tremendous improvement. Unlike the sham religious liberty protections that are in the latest version of the bill, Senator Lee's amendment would actually accomplish something. It would actually restrain the federal government from taking adverse action against individuals and organizations that hold traditional views about marriage. I think it's very telling that supporters of the bill are, at this point, unwilling to even allow a discussion of Senator Lee's amendment. And we hope that people out there will call their senators between now and 5:30 p.m. Eastern and let them know. Let there be a discussion of Senator Lee's amendment, which would make a bad bill less bad.
Of the 12 Republicans who support this bill, do you think any of them would get behind Senator Lee's amendment?
Well, we've certainly been having discussions with some of the senators who voted in favor of moving the bill forward. And we're cautiously optimistic that some of them will be willing to do so. They support the idea of Senator Lee's amendment, but it's all going to come down to the procedural mechanisms and whether they cast a vote that allows that amendment to be considered.
We will see. All right, Greg Baylor with the Alliance Defending Freedom, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, with Christmas right around the corner, a potential national railroad strike could be coming. It would be the first such strike in 30 years and could devastate the supply chain. It comes after failed negotiations between several railroad unions and the White House. Brody Carter reports on the possible economic impact.
More money isn't the goal of these union railway employees. They're fighting for paid medical leave and more time to spend with family. Failure to strike a deal likely means more than just delayed holiday gifts.
If you think about what travels on rail, it actually becomes a national security issue.
From ethanol and natural gas to building materials and even chemicals that purify your drinking water travel by rail. It could all come to a screeching halt if a deal is not reached.
Sick pay is not something that's negotiated in the agreements, and it's something that we've been trying to negotiate for several years. So when our guys call in sick or are unable to make it to work, they can and have been disciplined for doing such.
Union Division President Tony Cardwell represents some 23,000 workers in one of the three major unions looking for a new deal. They rejected a proposal from Labor Secretary Marty Walsh that would increase worker pay 24% over the next 5 years, add 1 personal day, and caps on healthcare costs.
Sick leave amounts to a whopping 1 cent on every dollar is what our estimates show of their profits. So we're talking a small fraction of money to improve membership's lives that the carriers are just unwilling to put forward. And once again, these are some of the most profitable companies in the country. The carriers can do something very simple to resolve that issue, and that's give our members some paid sick time.
A September strike was averted after President Biden imposed a 60-day cooling-off period, pushing negotiations past the midterm elections.
The only reason why right now that we're not in a worse situation is that the recession going as it's going right now, our imports from China are down significantly, and the ports are less busy.
At this point, Congress could prevent a work stoppage or lockout through the Railway Labor Act, either imposing a deal or forcing workers to go back to work under the terms of the contract they just rejected.
I really believe that they're going to have a strike, and once the government steps in and shuts down the strike, I believe we're going to have a massive slowdown. And it's going to cost the economy about $3 billion a day for every day that there's a strike or a slowdown.
Threat of a strike comes as several railroads are seeing record profits. Unions argue those profits come at the expense of labor workers. If all 12 unions don't agree to the terms of a new contract, a full strike could happen in early December. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thank you, Brody. The Uyghur community in the U.S. is expressing outrage over the deaths of at least 10 people in an apartment fire in China. Protesting today at the State Department, some say the number of those killed is actually much higher, citing hospital reports of at least 44 Uyghurs, including children, dead. China's zero COVID policy and strict lockdown rules are being blamed for those deaths. Now the communist government says it's easing up on restrictions in some areas. That as President Xi faces a wave of public anger and calls for his resignation. Dale Hurd has the story.
Protest against China's strict zero COVID policy and working conditions at an iPhone factory have turned into protest against the communist government itself and its system of repression. Protesters took to the streets in 8 Chinese cities after at least 10 people died in an apartment fire. Protesters claimed the residents couldn't escape the building because of the government's lockdown policies. Protesters shouted, "End the dictatorship, no more COVID tests," and called for Chinese leader Xi Jinping to resign.
The zero COVID policy has been a disaster, both economically and politically inside China.
The protests started last week at Foxconn's largest iPhone plant, when workers threw bed frames from their company dormitories at police in hazmat suits, angry by delays in bonus payments and the company's handling of a COVID outbreak. Frustrations have been building among Chinese citizens over a bad economy and now the government's heavy-handed COVID policies.
The situation in China is deteriorating fast. You have an economy which looks like it's contracting. The property sector, which is the core of the Chinese economy, is essentially in free fall.
These protests have turned into the most widespread display of opposition to the ruling Communist Party in decades.
Ultimately, what the Chinese Communist Party fears more than anything else is its own citizens. It represses the citizens because it knows that they are an illegitimate entity. They don't have legitimacy from the population. They fear their own citizens.
The government's zero COVID policy has closed schools, factories, and shops, and even sealed neighborhoods and apartment blocks without warning. But don't look for the Chinese government to make a major course correction.
It is unimaginable that they will try to resolve the issue by backing down, changing the policy. It is not the Xi Jinping style.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, how a private dinner at Mar-a-Lago is turning into a public disaster for former President Trump. The man accused of killing 10 people at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, has pleaded guilty. 19-year-old Peyton Gendron pleaded guilty to charges of murder, domestic terrorism, attempted murder as a hate crime, and weapons possession. The shooting happened back in May in a predominantly black neighborhood. The charges come with a mandatory sentence of life in prison. Meanwhile, there's growing backlash tonight against former President Trump over a recent dinner guest he hosted at Mar-a-Lago. Trump says he didn't know Nick Fuentes, an outspoken white nationalist and anti-Semite. He blames Kanye West for bringing Fuentes to the dinner. 24-year-old Fuentes is a Holocaust denier and one of the most prominent young white supremacists in America. West has also been under fire for recent anti-Semitic statements of his own. And with that, let's bring in CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. David, good to see you. So controversy at the dinner table at Mar-a-Lago. Some top Republicans very frustrated with Trump after this dinner with Nick Fuentes. How do you see it? Is this a mere lapse in judgment or something bigger?
Well, it definitely starts with a lapse in judgment. And honestly, let's back up from Trump for a moment and just think about the situation down at Mar-a-Lago. And Jenna, you know the inner circles of these folks. I mean, look, Donald Trump is not handled. He's not handled at all. He doesn't want to be handled. And the handlers around him typically just let things kind of go by. And I think that's exactly what we saw here. I mean, let's just ask a very straight up question. How in the world did Nick Fuentes get on the Mar-a-Lago resort area, anywhere close to it? I mean, how in the world did that happen? So Trump shouldn't have even been faced with a dinner with Kanye West and Nick Fuentes to begin with. But, you know, once again, this has been an Achilles heel for Trump. He is not served well at all. Yeah. I'm not letting Trump off the hook here. Don't get me wrong. We can get into all of those issues too. I'm just simply saying that why in the world was Fuentes even there in the first place? Did someone not vet him? You know, you have to have a guest list to get in. People are not doing their due diligence, and it's going to hurt Trump, especially this time around, and especially if you have people like Ron DeSantis, Mike Pompeo, other people that are vying for the nomination. This is not, it can't be the same way it was in 2016.
Yeah, it does raise a lot of questions. So far, Trump is refusing to disavow Fuentes as a white nationalist. Could he have nipped this all in the bud, David, last week by just coming out and condemning Fuentes for some of his beliefs?
There's no doubt he could have done that, but that's just not Trump. He's just not going to do it. And you say, well, why wouldn't he do it? Because once again, it gets back down to ego, Jenna. I mean, he has this thing where he's been so ridiculed by the media, and the media was taking him to task for meeting with Fuentes or having dinner there. So he wasn't going to give them, in essence, the satisfaction of saying, "Oh, sorry, my bad. I shouldn't have met with him," because that would make the media look right and noble and not make him look good. And we know that that's not good for Trump, so to speak. And so I think that's a big part of it here. Once again, you know, I got to tell you, it's one thing to not be a politician in 2016, and Trump was this new brand, so to speak, in terms of people getting to know him running for president. But this is a different time around. I mean, these are unforced errors. I mean, Nick Fuentes, you know, shame on everybody there. He should never have been at that dinner with Donald Trump. And Kanye West, for that same matter, too.
David, just a few seconds left, but do you think this rollout for Donald Trump in 2024 has lost kind of its sparkle that 2016 had?
It definitely doesn't have the sparkle. I don't think there's any question about it. I think that the question is, can he rekindle the magic? And, you know, only time will tell. I think what's really going to be interesting is to see what people like Mike Pompeo, you know, he's going to get in. We're hearing Nikki Haley get in, and others. We'll see how much they go after Trump, because you go after Trump, you go after MAGA.
Right. All right, David Brody, always good to see you. Thank you, David.
Yep. Thanks, Shanna.
And when we come back, a look at Israel's national security and U.S. State Department concerns over the man just appointed to keeping the Jewish state safe. You're watching CBN's Faith Nation. Turning to Israel, where incoming Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is holding intense negotiations on forming a new government. In a position created just for him, Itamar Ben-Gvir has been named to the new national security minister. But as Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, Israel's president and the U.S. State Department have some concerns over the appointment.
During Israel's recent elections campaign, Itamar Ben-Gvir took the spotlight.
He's a little bit like Donald Trump. He behaves in an outrageous manner. He does so on purpose, and he is very visible, or has been up to the election.
Ben-Gvir's party joined others to create the Religious Zionist Party, which won 14 seats, making it the third largest in the Knesset. But during meetings with the various parties after the election, Israeli President Isaac Herzog was caught on a hot mic saying the entire world was anxious about Ben-Gvir. The State Department condemned Ben-Gvir when he attended an event honoring the late Meir Kahane, who advocated expelling Arabs from Israel and who Ben-Gvir followed as a young man.
Celebrating the legacy of a terrorist organization is abhorrent. There is no other word for it. It is abhorrent. And we remain concerned, as we said before, by the legacy of Kahane and the continued use of rhetoric among violent right-wing extremists.
But Israeli journalist and columnist Ruthie Bloom told CBN News Ben-Gvir has changed.
Well, what the press is doing is treating him as though he's the same Ben-Gvir as he was many years ago. And as he has said repeatedly, I no longer believe, as I used to, in the teachings of Rabbi Meir Kahane. I no longer believe that all Arabs should be kicked out of Israel. I only believe that terrorists should be.
At the scene of the latest terror attack that killed 2 Israelis and injured more than a dozen, Ben-Gvir gave an idea of what actions he would advocate as Israel's national security minister.
I say it in a clear way. We must exact the price from terror, go back to targeted assassinations to stop the parties in the security prisons, to stop the Palestinian Authority supporting terrorism payments. This can be done. I'm not talking politics, but we have to establish a government as fast as possible.
And that was Chris Mitchell reporting. And still ahead, Christmas comes to the White House. The First Lady reveals the unifying message behind this year's theme. Finally tonight, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas at the White House. And in keeping with tradition, First Lady Jill Biden unveiled the holiday decorations today and offered a message of unity and hope, which is right in line with the theme for this year's White House holiday season. We are the people.
The values that unite us can be found all around you. A belief in possibility and optimism and unity.
Among the Christmas decor, 77 Christmas trees and over 83,000 lights, a festive display made possible by 150 volunteers from all over the country, and it looks beautiful. We're going to leave it on that note tonight and leave you with some of these images. Have a great evening.